I'm Rabbi Patrick, and welcome to Kihila. A big subject today. We're going to talk about God. Let's set our covenant. Let's set our intentions. Maybe you're coming home from work and you just want to relax. Maybe this is the stuff that pumps you up. Maybe you just need to sit and learn something. No matter where you are, who you are, what's going on, we're here for you. Thank you for being part of Kihila. We're going to join together with the Shema, and then we're going to get into some interesting questions of translation. So let's do this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, which could translate in a lot of different ways. Before we get to that, I want to ask you a question. I want you to just take a moment. Maybe you even have to sit down and write this out. Maybe I'll just hit the pause button here, whatever you need to do. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. So this was an exercise that Mordecai Kaplan, founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, used to do with his students. So is that God the God that lives in the sky, has a beard, whose feet are planted on the ground? Is this the God who walks in the Garden of Eden? Is this the God who writes laws, mitzvot, chokim umishpatim? Is this a God who intervenes in the world? Or is this a God who's so far away that it's like practically talking about air, right? Or a God that, is so transcendental, but like you don't want to call this God like the source of the universe or the divine or the universe itself. Maybe that just sounds like some hokey Instagram type stuff. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. And I'd love you to send me a message about that. Love to know more about the God you don't believe in. Think about that for a minute. And now let's get into it. So you can translate the Shema in a bunch of different ways. And this is the thing about translations. We're always putting our bias into translation. So is it, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one? Is it, Hear, O Israel, Yah, which is a very particular God, particular Israelite God, is our God, Yah alone? Meaning there might be other gods in the universe, but we don't really care. This is our Jewish God. Is it not Hear, Israel, like Shema, but is it Listen, Israel? Same word, Shema. Listening and hearing are two different things. Maybe this is met with more intentionality, right? When you listen to something, you're a more active participant. So if the Israelites, that's us, are active participants, we then learn that the Lord our God, the Lord is Echad, is one in the universe, one out of many, the one we pay attention to. Or is it God is one like capital O-N-E, one, like oneness? We talked a few podcast episodes ago about Ein Od Milvado, meaning like there is nothing but God. So maybe God's oneness is the oneness of all things. Okay, well, that sounds lovely. Thing about the Bible is that it is composite literature, right? It's almost like I imagine in The Prince of Egypt when they're like gathering all of their stuff to head out into the journey to the promised land, right? The Bible, this codex, this book, is this collection of all of these different scrolls that have been edited together. So when people talk about God in the Bible, and you can just do the Torah or you can expand out from there, these are different experiences of God that people have had, different theological points of view. So if we're already confused on the Shema, let's look at Psalm 96, verse 5, because this is something that we sing on Shabbat. It's one of the Kabbalat Shabbat songs. If you translate it, it says, all the gods of the people are mere idols, but Yah, the four-letter name that we don't pronounce, Adonai, Hashem, whatever you want to use, the Lord made the heavens, Shamayim Asa. So if we're just saying that the Amim have these Elelim, if they have these celestial beings, these gods, whatever, it says here that all of the gods, all of the Elohe of the Ha'amim, of all of the peoples, they're like Elelim. Okay, I bet you're really confused. So this word El is God, and actually El was a deity in the Canaanite religion. And sometimes the Bible uses the word El as just a placeholder. So an El is just a god, like a lowercase g, God. whereas Yud Hey Vav Hey might be like capital G God. That's one way of looking at it. But if we say all of the gods are Elelim, so they're like idols or they're just these other gods, right? But our God made the heavens. We're claiming a kind of superiority here, and that's why you might translate the Elilim as idols, and it could just also be gods, um, into something a little bit more um, diminished, right? Whereas we're elevating our understanding of what our God is because Shemai Masa, because our God made the heavens. Okay, well, that's another theology. Let's skip again. So this is another song that we sing. This is Mi Chamocha. It's funny if you think about it. Do you ever just kind of go along with these songs on Shabbat or on a holiday or whatever, and think about what you're actually saying? So I know when we adopted Javon on Friday nights, we would put out these benchers. We'd put out these little books on the Shabbat table, and we would show him how you can follow along, right? If you want to say kiddush or light candles or whatever, you would know the blessings. And one day, it was like a year and a half later, like sometime later after we had adopted him, and he had Shabbat after holiday after whatever, and he said, we were talking about the idea of praying, and I said, well, we pray every Friday night, right, at the Shabbat dinner table, like you're sitting there, and he's like, those are prayers. I said, yeah, they're in that book that we give to you to look at, and he could follow along if he wants, and he just kind of chooses not to. That's okay. Um, he was like, "Oh, those are prayers? I thought we were just kind of saying stuff." Anyway, we're making big theological presuppositions here with some of this. So Exodus 15:11, Michamocha, who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Hmm. Let's see. I don't know about that, right? So, Michamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, Adonai, ba'elim, among the, ooh, you're hearing that L word, right? Among the celestials, among the gods, who is like you among the other gods. Wait, are we now saying there are other gods, right? Are we polytheists now? Okay. Michamocha nidar ba'kodesh, nora tehilot ose fele. So, if you look at we were talking about before, which is the idea of God making the heavens, Shemaim Asa. Okay, we have this same word, Ose. So there's this idea that we're connecting here that like our God makes stuff. These other gods aren't involved in some way of making things, of doing things. So that's kind of the direction it seems like we're going in here. Now, let me further confuse the fact. So Deuteronomy is what is the Shema is verse 6, okay? If you go back to Deuteronomy and you flip towards the end of the darn thing, you get to Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9. You get this story, and it's very unusual. And it says here, when the Most High gave nations their homes and set the divisions of man, he fixed the boundaries of people in relation to Israel's numbers. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his own allotment. Okay, weird, wonky, old timey language. Let's just kind of break this down piece by piece. So, when the Most High, okay, how do we deal with this? And it says here, when El Yon. Okay, so there's that L sound again. Okay, but it's not Yud Hey Vav Hey, right? This is talking about El Yon, the high God, when the Most High, right? When the biggest L. Okay, gave nations their homes, or made the nations set apart, whatever, and set the divisions of man. So basically, how did human beings get where they were, and what became this tribe and that tribe and this boundary and whatever? Okay, it says in relation to Israel's numbers. Well, what? That that doesn't make sense. It actually says B'nai Yisrael. It says the children of Israel. Okay. So set the nations based on like the children of Israel, like that doesn't make any sense in relation to the numbers, mispar, right? That just what? Okay. But then it goes even further. It says Adonai Amo. Okay. So, Adonai's people, Yaakov. Okay. So we know who that is. That's Jacob. Okay. His people, Amo, are, Jacob, right? and that's his allotment. Okay, that's his group. So, wait a minute. It seems like Elyon is doing something when the Most High is doing something, and then somehow we've got God's name changing there and becoming Yud Hey Vav Hey. Hmm. Oops. This is now a little confusing. So God is somehow creating the boundaries of people and setting who belongs to who and all that. And then suddenly, Yah, our God, pops up and it has to do with us and our numbers and things like that. You could read it as some higher deity is making decisions and then gives to us through Yud Hey Vav Hey our boundary, right? Because you would instead just start with Yud Hey Vav Hey, right? You wouldn't have this Elyon. Now, this is a thing that then again gets translated differently, right? Elyon, Yud Hey Vav Hey have the same name, right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe Elyon is just a title that you would give to Yud Hey Vav Hey in this particular experience, particularly because it's so transcendent. Most times when you see El or Elyon, something like that, it's talking about something that's very universal and very transcendental. When you're talking about something that is closer to us, something that's about, giving laws to us or being in relationship with us, that's when you get Yud Hey Vav Hey. So just kind of an interesting quirk there. So, I guess if we left it there, we'd be left with this strange question of like, well, so are we still monotheists? Is that what we're doing here? Are we talking about like, is there more than one God? Right? If you've been listening to this and now you're totally confused or you just want to sort of hang up the phone, so to speak, hey, I wouldn't blame you because it is a mess. But this is one of the issues with how you translate the Bible and how we put our own theological perspectives on top of the text. So let me go even further. Let's get outside of the Bible for a minute. Let's get into some other texts. So now we're going to get into the Talmud. And this is going to be a fun one. So sometimes the Talmud will set up these stories that are kind of absurd, and they're the sort of stories that you would tell a kid, or things you might do with a kid to help them learn a lesson. So this is in a Talmud here, this cool story. Uh, so Hulin 60a. So this person says, I wish to see God. Rabbi Yehoshua went and stood the emperor, who is this person who wants to see God, facing the summer sun. Okay, so here's what we're doing here. We have two grown men. One of them's an emperor. He says, I want to see, God. You're talking so big about God, Rabbi Yehoshua. So show me. Okay, so Rabbi Yehoshua decides to mess with the emperor. He says, okay, take a look at the sun. Rabbi Yehoshua says to him, okay, look at it. And the emperor, rightly, says, I cannot. Right, because we don't want to burn our eyes out by staring at the sun, obviously. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, now, if with regard to the sun, which is only one of the servants that stand before the Holy One, blessed be he, you say, I cannot look at it, is it not all the more so with regard to the divine presence? So that's a very fancy way of saying, if you can't stare at the sun, and the sun is subservient to God, how on earth do you think you're going to stare at God? There you go. That's simple. There was a belief, and we don't really even know where this comes from. It's just something that's in the minds of the various characters of the Torah that if they look at God, if they see God face to face, they will die. And so I wonder by looking at this piece of Talmud if this is sort of where that logic came into being, because you had people who knew if you stare at the sun, it's going to burn your eyes out. They didn't know why. They just knew the light was so bright that it would burn your eyes. So too with seeing a God face to face, right? It would be like, that scene in Indiana Jones when they open the ark, right? Same idea. And I think that's kind of where that comes from. Also, you ever notice that the number 7 is big in Judaism? There's other religions that have 7 as being important too, but the seventh day and Shabbat and holidays are a week long and all of that. Now, you notice some of that. 7 days of creation. 7 just seems to be a big deal. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Hopefully, you don't hear me gulping. There's a theory that the reason why the number 7 is the sacred number is that if you don't have a telescope, if you don't have any way of like observing the sky other than by your eyes, you would see 7 heavenly bodies. And so maybe that's where the number 7 comes from. So again, this idea of like if I look at these things, like if I look at the sun and it burns my eyes, and that's not nearly as powerful as a deity would be, then certainly I would die. And here in the Talmud, you have a version of that story. So we're developing this sense of what God is through observation. Okay. We observe our world around us and we start to find context clues. Here's another one. This is a little bit of a commentary ish fun thing. It's Shmot Rabbah. A Gentile once asked Rabbi Joshua, why did the Holy One, blessed be he, and by the way, you find this all through rabbinic literature, they call God HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kadosh, the Holy One, Baruch Hu, blessed is he. Okay, so why did the Holy One, blessed be he, see fit to speak to Moses from within the thorn bush? Okay, so this is Shmot Rabbah, this is Shmot, this is the book of Exodus, and these are these kind of commentaries and stories on these different verses. And we have here this question of like, why the acacia tree? Why the thorn bush that's lit on fire and is not consumed? So this Gentile, this non-Jew, is asking this question. How could this be possible? So Rabbi Joshua retorts, and I love this. This is such a gotcha. If it had been a carob tree or a sycamore tree, would you not have asked the same question? Okay. So, in other words, like you're asking me why a thorn bush, but you know that you would ask like if it was anything, if anything was consumed by or was on fire but wasn't consumed and a miracle was happening, you would ask. Like he's not accepting this premise of, is a thorn bush silly, right? The Gentile is almost kind of maybe making fun in some way. Now, we're interpreting that, we're placing that on the text, but why this lowly thorn bush? Why is that what's lit on fire? Why would God choose that? Rabbi Joshua gives his retort, and then he says, however, to send you away without any answer is not possible. So, in other words, there is an answer, and I am going to give it to you. Okay, so why within a thorn bush? To teach you that there is no empty place devoid of the Shekhinah, not even a lowly thorn bush. So Shekhinah sort of being like God's omnipresence. So in a long way, Rabbi Joshua is saying, look, why a thorn bush? Why not a thorn bush? God is in everything, right? God's presence is, never void anywhere. There's no empty place where God is not present, right? So God is in all of it in some way, or God's presence, God's Shekhinah is in all of it. So this is in some ways like pantheism, all right? God is everything, or panentheism, where God is sort of everything and outside of it at the same time. So again, this layer upon layer upon layer. Let's now get into Maimonides. So now we're going fast forward. Maimonides is sort of a rationalist. He's an Aristotelian type. And in his Guide for the Perplexed, he says, part 319, it is undoubtedly an innate idea that God must be perfect in every respect and cannot be deficient in anything. Okay, so he's getting that from Greek and Roman thought. He's applying that layer. But there's a problem, right? Because there are times where God is limited. In fact, when when Moses is going to part the Red Sea, you could actually read part of it as God saying, like, well, what do you want from me? Go ahead, like, go do the thing. So maybe God's just saying, no, like, I can't do this for you. You need to go do it. Now, is that a deficiency, or is that more like being a parent, right? Sometimes you just have to tell your kid, no, you have to do it yourself. Do I have the capacity to do it? Sure, I do. But this is a you thing, not a me thing. So that could be part of it. There's times where God does not know where someone is. And so someone will say, Hineni, here I am. You can interpret that as a deficient God, right? Who's looking for something. At the same time, you could read it in that sort of parent mode. You could say, no. This is one of those things where the parent wants the child to learn something. And this phrase "Hineni, here I am," this is a spiritual call. We sort of interpret it that way. Hineni doesn't just mean like yoo-hoo over here. It means I'm now prepared. I'm in the moment. I am ready to do this. I am accepting the call to adventure, as they'd say in the sort of Joseph Campbell uh, hero's journey way. So, can we get behind the idea that God is not deficient in any way? Okay, we could do that, but then this gets a little tough because if God is perfect, God is not deficient in any way, in any respect, then God hears our prayers and chooses not to act on them. So you think of all of the calamities that have befallen the Jewish people, and suddenly now we're talking about a God who is perfect, and therefore our demise was in some sense part of the plan, or at least God's reaction to it is correct from God's point of view. That's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know about that. Don't know if I can hang with that. But that's where we get into some of these questions, in our lives where we ask, like, where was God in this moment? Or why did it happen this way? Why do things happen the way they do? And so that's when we get into further text. So the Zohar, which is Jewish mysticism, says the following. This world is formed on a pattern of the world above. And whatever takes place in this earthly realm occurs also above. Power below depends on power above depends on corresponding power below. So another way of looking at this, it's like a mirror. So every time we do a mitzvah, every time we do a commandment, I mean, anything from like you're eating the kosher sandwich to you're helping a loved one to you're praying, anything. It's almost like it releases this divine energy or this divine image or whatever word you want to use. And then that kind of bounces up into the universe, or out into, maybe is another way of looking at it, the universe. And then that is going to come back in some way. And we're in this reciprocal energy exchange between us and the world above. So, in this way, the more mitzvahs we do, the more we are in sync, you might say, with the heavens. So that's where this kind of idea of why do things happen the way they do, there is a certain amount of personal responsibility and this exchange of energy with the divine. Now, all of this, including mysticism, presumes a God who is active in the universe, who is doing things, who is making critical decisions over and over and over again, right? Trillionth of a second decisions. Boom, 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 boom. As we get closer to modernity, that theology doesn't work the way it used to. So Baruch Spinoza says the following: all things are conditioned by the necessity of the divine nature. What he's basically saying here is deism, right? God is the prime mover. God gets the ball rolling, and then everything from there is just the clock ticking the way that it would. Okay. This is a God of the founders of our country and the Constitution. This is the way that a lot of scientists spoke about God. This is Albert Einstein talked about God in this way. He would say, God doesn't roll dice with nature. In other words, things are the way they are. So, what you get there, no revelation, right? No God who chooses people, but you have a God who is the universe itself, right? That is science in that way. Still, something you can be reverent towards, but maybe not a God who hears our prayers and breaks the laws of nature in order to intervene on our needs, or anyone's needs for that matter. And then God gets even more poetic. So this is one of my favorite ones. This is Martin Buber, and he uses this line: when two people relate to each other authentically and humanly, God is the electricity that surges between them. I love to talk about this at funerals, actually, um, because you have people who are having these memories of their loved one. And there's just certain people in life, I think I relate to these people a little bit, who are just like so authentically themselves that sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's not so good. Sometimes their authenticity gets in their own way a little bit. That's been something for Elul for this holy month that we're in. I've been reflecting on in what ways does my personality get in the way of my ability to live the kind of life that I want to live. In what ways am I a little too authentic, right? To borrow from Dave Chappelle, sometimes keeping it real can go wrong. But, um, that's the authentic, but then there's humanly, right? Which we could also read in some ways as humanely, right? What are those times that you've had going back to that funeral story? If you've lost a loved one and you're sitting there and you're thinking about them and you're thinking about this sort of montage of moments of wonderful things that have happened, all these times when you've really felt connected to them. Or maybe you have that with someone who's alive. You ever look at your loved one and just go, yeah, that's the good stuff, right? You're out to dinner somewhere and you just look in their eyes and you're like, oh, what a win. And it's true with your kids too, right? Maybe you're playing with your kids, or maybe your kids are grown and you're watching them do something, and you're just like, oh yeah, we did this. That's what's up. Um, that's that moment of authenticity and humanity, and that kind of energy between you. It's not just your emotions; it's actually an exchange of energy. Um, Martin Buber is saying that's God's presence. Remember that human beings are made in the divine image, right? So then that means that when we relate to people authentically, we are seeing the divine in one another. If you do yoga, you've probably heard the expression something like, and I'm not a yoga guy, so I'm gonna totally get this wrong, but something like, the light in me recognizes the light in you. So something like that. Back to my guy, Mordecai Kaplan, he says, in brief, God is the power in the cosmos that gives human life the direction that enables the human being to reflect the image of God. Okay, so that's a little bit of a paradox, but basically, God is this power that gives you the ability to turn around, to be put in a way that your godliness is manifesting in the universe. Okay, so God is like creator, creation, and creating, all in this kind of same way. Um, Mordecai Kaplan said that God is that which provides for human salvation. And when we think of salvation, that's problematic because in America, in a Christian environment, we might think like, oh, that means like salvation for our sins and all that. It's not that theology. Instead, it's that God is in some ways the energy that makes us more fully human, right? We alone as people, as organisms on this planet, cannot fully transcend because of the biological realities of who we are. God is the power that allows us to transcend, to become one with everything, et cetera, et cetera. So I've given you a lot to think about here, and there's so much more. But that's a little bit about what is God. And I think the next time I talk about this, I'm going to talk about what could this God, however you wish to understand God, want from us. Because it's not enough to just say like, I believe in God, but like what does God want from us? And at the end of the day, if God wants something from us, isn't there a deal? And if there's a deal, then why do bad things happen to good people? And that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. Thank you so much. Take care. God bless. Quick note here, friends. It's about 3 weeks before high holidays, and we have already sold half our tickets for Erev Rosh Hashanah and for Kol Nidre. The evening events are the more popular events because those are the times when people can get off of work and things like that traditionally. So I wanted to offer some ideas here for people who have different kinds of schedules and different family needs. I promise this is quick, but I just want you to know what we think might be the best options for you. So if you cannot take the day off, you need to get there right after work and you kind of want some dinner before you go home. Definitely, you're going to want the Rosh Hashanah evening service and the Yom Kippur concluding service, which has a break fast as well. Those are the tickets that are sold halfway already, so you need to grab those. If you're retired, if you want something during the day, we have Rosh Hashanah day, we have the morning service, no night driving, which is fantastic. What if you're a family with kids? Your kids do not want to sit for more than 15 minutes. I get it. That's the kind of family situation you got. You need super kid friendly things. And also, let's save you from having to make dinner. So, Jewish High Holidays pop up at Art Factory includes PJ Library, includes food and music and art activities and story time. This is great. And it's free. So, we hope you'll come to that. That's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And of course, if you just want something right at the end, if you just want something that you can bring your family to and say, we did it, right? It wasn't just a cool party, but it was really a service. Yom Kippur concluding services. Again, these evening ones are the ones that are about 50% sold. So you need to grab those if you want them. If you're someone who's not really into davening, if prayer is not where you are, of course you could come to the High Holidays party, but also the Shabbat Shuvah dinner at the rabbi's. That's me. I'm going to be cooking a big meal. I just came from the kosher grocery store in Silver Spring, Maryland to get stuff. Totally excited about it. About half those tickets have sold because, again, evening stuff always sells faster. It is a fun family environment with great people. So it's not just for adults. We'd love to have your kids. So definitely come if you're more into the food and the culture aspect of this and not so much the prayer aspect. Now, on the opposite end, if you are someone who is seeking deep spiritual connection, I'm going to tell you, Yom Kippur is what you're in it for. Those Kol Nidre, the Yom Kippur morning service, and the Yom Kippur concluding service. Just going ahead, make Yom Kippur your thing. Rosh Hashanah, you'll have your fun, you'll have your apples and honey, all that good stuff, but Yom Kippur, that's what you're in it for. If you have any questions, rabbi@rabbipatrick.com, or you can go on kahilarva.org. But make sure to get those tickets. I know it's tempting to wait till the last second, but we don't want anyone feeling sad and left out. So thank you so much.